Hello, my dear student. I hope you are doing well today. Today lecture is about primary and secondary sources. Let us have a start. What do we mean by primary sources? Primary sources are the original words of the writer, um, novel, speech, diary, eyewitness, letter, photography, or interview. It means I am the owner of all of these. I am who write about it. Okay, this is mean the primary sources. They are basic materials with little or no editorial alteration. What are the advantages and disadvantages of primary sources? Advantages represent in the following points. Number one, less biases. It means objective. They represent the author opinion. So you are less likely to be affected by the biases of others who have filtered the material before presenting, because you are going to deal with the author opinion. Then you will be depending on your own judgment rather than on someone else. The disadvantages are they are a narrow scope, because the scope of a single source may be narrow. For example, if you have a photograph for the author, so it is only one source, sorry. So it is a narrow scope. You don't have a lot of information, only one photograph or one photo. Also, they are rarely or hard to find, and they are actually time consuming, because you are going to search about rare items. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of primary sources. Now we are going to deal with secondary sources. Secondary sources derive from primary materials and include analysis, interpretations, and commentary on primary materials. So they are explanation for the primary materials or the work of others, not the work of the main author. Okay, so secondary sources are writings about the primary sources and about the authors who produce primary material. In other words, they use primary sources or other secondary sources of its biases. Do not feel free to quote liberally from secondary sources. Be selective. It means don't depend on secondary sources without consideration. You have to be careful and in selecting information or your quotation from secondary sources. You have to be selective to avoid bias. So the advantages and disadvantages of secondary sources, we have the main point, which they are judgmental, and this may be considered as advantage and disadvantage. How? The disadvantage of secondary sources that we mentioned, that they usually present judgments about the source material, is at the same time I am also one of their most important advantage. For example, it mentioned, let us say, some author write about a grammar translation method disadvantages. When I'm going to mention this in writing my opinion, if my title was the disadvantages of a grammar translation method, this will be an advantage, okay? But it also, in the same time, be the it it will be disadvantage about my writing. Why? Because it biased to the disadvantages, not mention the advantages also. Okay, so it has two faces, two coin faces, point or benefit. Number two of the advantage, offer primary sources. Secondary sources always mention the primary sources. For example, if I read a commentary work about, let us say, the letters of a specific author, this secondary source mention which primary source of this author talk about. So it may lead the way to find this primary source, okay? And the disadvantage of secondary source, as we mentioned, if I write about the disadvantage of grammar translation method and I found a topic about disadvantage of a grammar translation method, that means there are another researcher write about also disadvantage of grammar translation method. There is another researcher think about my topic. It is disadvantages. Okay, because as we mentioned in selecting a topic, my topic should be unique and not be searched or talked about before. It should be new and add some new information, and this is disadvantage. This this is a comparison between primary and secondary sources. The primary sources, such as novel, poem, or a story, for example, Napoleon's diary, transcript of a trial, okay? And the secondary sources, the critical articles explaining these works. For example, a biography of Napoleon article in Time magazine about that trial, okay? I would like to mention a real example. For example, your text about the novel or short story. For example, The Old Man and the Sea. When you ever read the story itself, Old Man and the Sea, this is the primary sources. When you are going to write the comments or the opinions from another text, this is the secondary sources. Okay, I hope this be clear for you. Here you are some recommendation for you. The best recommendation is to try to find as many primary sources as you can instead of relying entirely on secondary resources. But look for secondary sources too. Each type has its own strengths, and each will help you evaluate the other. Details from primary sources can help you determine the worth of the judgment on secondary sources. The secondary sources can help you understand the material and your primary sources and can identify where you might look for additional primary sources. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. If you have any question or comment, please leave a comment. And the link of the text lecture in the description box. Thank you for your time. Thanks for your listening and have a good day.